Good morning. Thanks for joining us for Privacy Chat. I'm Nancy Levesque, Communications Director at the Future of Privacy Forum. Augmented and virtual reality technologies, collectively known as extended reality or XR, have become mainstream. Today, Jules is joined by FPF Policy Counsel Jeremy Greenberg to discuss the ethical and privacy considerations associated with XR tech. We'll also preview FPF's XR week of events and the launch of the new AR/VR report, all happening next week from April 19th to the 23rd. Here's Jules and Jeremy.
Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us. Nancy, thanks for kicking us off. And Jeremy, thanks for joining. So AR, VR, XR, I don't know. When the pandemic started, I thought we were all going to somehow have some accelerated development and we'd all be sitting with goggles and having virtual meetings. Where we're not. We're still, Zooming or streaming here. But it sounds like there's been a lot of progress, and it's not a futuristic thing anymore. And for those of us who are interested in the privacy and the data and the policy and the risk issues, it's time to start making sure that policies and practices are in place. Jeremy, before I ask you to sort of jump in and maybe just let's make sure everybody understands what we're talking about in terms of these technologies. Did you read Ready Player One?
So I actually have not read Ready Player One, but I've seen the cliff notes. I've seen the description.
Okay, you must read Ready Player One, because for me, that was really kind of what opened my mind to sort of the notion that there might be a time where, I guess, how about the movie? Did you see the movie?
Yeah, that.
All right, that counts. All right, but the book's better. The book's better. The book's better. If anybody out there has read the book and you agree with me that it is better than the movie, please do chime in. So for those who haven't, definitely recommend it as assigned reading. Maybe it should be part of our privacy book club, because it definitely gives you some sense of a environment where we interact and learn and shop and have our careers, all in a virtual environment where people, strap into their pod, and this is where you do commerce. And it might have been, fantastical a year ago. But since we are strapped into our pods right now, and indeed, doing our activities, and frustrated perhaps that being in the webinar or the Zoom, puts us in a little box when we might want a sense of more virtual interaction, even when we return to the workplace, where the remote employees or telemedicine or the like. I've had some telemedicine appointments, and it's fine. Doctor asks you questions, but you can imagine, a virtual checkup where you're, actually, sitting there with your body and your vitals, and a doctor doing a much more direct examination. Anyway, help us distinguish. XR, I think Nancy properly said, is sort of a way to describe this collectively, but AR, VR. So VR, AR, distinguish for the legal and policy audience what we're really talking about.
Yeah, thank you, Jules. So virtual reality, or VR, is really all about immersion. And that is about making the user feel that they are fully immersed, that they feel a sense of presence in an entire virtual world or virtual space. And this is generally achieved through the use of specialty hardware, most notably the VR headset. So something like your Oculus Quest or your HTC headset, something of that nature. It's really about this sense of immersion or presence. Augmented reality, on the other hand, is about mapping or placing digital or virtual content onto a physical environment. And today, users are experiencing this often through the use of a camera on their smart device. So it could be your mobile phone, you're playing Pokemon Go, and you're out in the world, you have your camera capturing the landscape you're in, and you have digital Pokemon placed on top of that landscape. So those I would say are the primary differences between those two different technologies.
So to make it easy, today, the things that people might encounter might be these headsets, the Oculus or the HoloLens from Microsoft or others that you put over your face, and now you feel like you're skiing or you're on a mountain or whatever it is. Maybe even a room. People have probably been in sort of movies where the seats moved and there was, stuff that made you feel like you were elsewhere, right? You were in some environment. So maybe in some future world, we go into a conference room and we feel like we're in another space because the entire environment is virtual. And AR, I'm in the real world, but there may be extra information. Maybe I'm driving and there's information on the screen or on my windshield instead of looking at my GPS, traffic information or other overlays, the Pokemon information. There's an overlay that there's a creature in the world, but in future vision, one might imagine an inspector seeing pipes underground, seeing actual information that is useful. Maybe a doctor is doing surgery and instead of having to look elsewhere, sees the information that is needed, projected, the precision, the outline of where nerves are, or the inspector knows where the pipes are, right? Sort of a deep overlay. In fact, Magic Leap, one of the leading companies in the space, which initially was doing both consumer and business, I think now focuses more significantly on sort of the kinds of tools that businesses might need and might use. And there are some who think that might be the earlier adopter place. And then obviously there are others, the consumer companies that are leading. Now, is this all about gaming? I mean, you hear the gamers always being sort of first here. Is gaming kind of the lead right now in this?
Yeah, I would say that right now gaming really is the lead. That's where there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of investment. But we are really seeing this technology used in a number of different areas. And perhaps what we're learning from VR or AR in the gaming space can serve as a dry run for other sectors. So you mentioned, the health and wellness sector, surgeons using AR technology to overlay certain bodily information when performing surgery. That's a major application. We're also seeing this definitely in the employment context for training, especially when relating to industrial training, or when you're training someone on a construction job who might be using a potentially hazardous machine or chemicals, a high-risk situation. They're able to sort of practice this in VR beforehand, before doing so in real life. And you're also seeing this used in education. Some educational benefits are maybe quite obvious, the idea of going on a virtual field trip with students. But yeah, there is definitely more to this stuff than just gaming.
The policy issues. So I strap the headset to my face. What data issues? We know this is a very data intensive type device. It needs powerful computing, but what are they collecting more than my web browsing when I go to a website? We know there's a lot of data collection when I use a phone or an app. What's more or new here that ought to be of interest to us?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, as you said, this is very data intensive. So certain studies indicate that up to 20 minutes of VR use can generate up to 20 million unique data, or 2 million unique data points for an individual. So you think 2 million data elements with 20 minutes of use, a massive amount of data is collected. And much of this data is biometric or relates to human biology. So some examples include eye tracking data, so things like measuring the user's gaze, changes in size of their pupils.
And why is that needed? Why is that needed?
Yeah. So much of this data really is necessary. So when you're in an immersive environment, the scene has to be rendered based on where you're looking as the user. So eye tracking is really important for knowing what parts of a scene to render, what parts of a particular virtual room to bring into focus or bring out of focus to mimic the human eye and to make it a smooth experience. And tracking the user's location within the particular space where they're enjoying this technology. That's really important.
So to make it very simple, I'm wearing a headset. I'm looking at the scene. I look around. My eyes move. Maybe my head moves, but my eyes move, and the rest of the 360 environment starts being displayed in a way that makes it feel like I'm there, because what I look at is now rendered, right? I look around, and so really kind of having a lot of detail about the shape of my eyes and how this is critical for it to function, but obviously quite perhaps sensitive data. I think there have been some studies that show that is very often unique, right? I mean, that's a physiological measurement in a very accurate way of your face. So it's certainly biometric, right?
That's right.
To switch to AR for a second, I guess, things are being displayed. I had a great fun test of one of the AR devices, and I was able to go to a store and take a table that was, this was at Wayfair, popular chain in the US and beyond, and I could take a table and see whether it fit in my space and what it would look like by literally picking it up. It looked real, and putting it here, and then I could walk around and literally see, while I was wearing, the headset, see it in my space and understand, like, would it fit and what it would look like. And, and another scene was a game, and there were monsters coming out of a portal and looking to fight with me, and, jumping over my furniture, and I could hide behind a desk, and, they interacted with the furniture. Or I think didn't Star Wars, I think, did something with Magic Leap where certain little creatures, I forget what they were. Any Star Wars geeks in the audience, let me know if you remember. But you could adopt one and have one in your house, and it would move around. You'd find it on your couch, as long as you were wearing the device. It lived in your house and it interacted. But that means that my entire space is being, mapped and detailed. You remember there was a concern once that the Roomba was learning people's houses, right, and keeping, your house in the cloud. So what are the companies that are working on these issues doing? I mean, is this all Jeff Jokish in our comments here, flags, you lock this stuff up with data brokers, having your identity and now all this information, that's pretty scary. What are the kinds of things companies are thinking about, or are you and others? Joe Jerome did a really valuable paper here from Common Sense, who is the fabulous academic who had a paper that won at Privacy Law Scholars. One of the papers we highlighted was
Britton Heller's paper. And now you have a paper coming out very shortly. Tell us a little bit about what's, so we haven't posted it yet, but we'll have it in a very short period of time. We're rolling it out with almost sort of an AR XR week. Say something about, what's coming logistically, what people should look for. And then let's touch a little bit on some of the ideas that you laid out in the paper. Yeah, definitely. So our paper is going to be released this Monday, April 19th, and that is going to kick off our XR week of events. which includes a number of conversations both in and out of VR, which is really exciting. Our big event that week is occurring on Wednesday from 2 to 3:30, and we are on April 21st, and we're in a conversation with a number of experts in this area. I'm going to be speaking with James Hairston, who's the Director of Policy for Facebook Reality Labs. I'm also going to be joined by Joe Jerome of Common Sense Media, Anna Lang, who's the General Counsel for Magic Leap, obviously a big player in this space, as well as Jessica Outlaw, who's an XR behavioral scientist who has all sorts of expertise around things like cyber harassment and some of the more sociological issues involved in this tech. I'm also going to have a couple of conversations throughout the week in VR. I'm going to be joined by John Verdi, and we're going to be doing some virtual fishing while discussing some policy questions. And I'm also going to be joined by Carolina Alonso, where we're going to be discussing some legal compliance issues with XR while we sculpt some 3D virtual images. So it's going to be a fun week, a dynamic week, and yeah, we're excited about it.
And what are the policies and practices that we have sort of set out or are pointing to? Joe Jerome of Common Sense is with us in the comments and flags the importance of a baseline policy restriction against facial recognition. What are the, let's identify some of the concerns. So facial recognition, obviously, if this data that may need to be collected about people's faces is then leveraged for individual authentication or other FR concerns. What are some of the other? So there's a collection of biometric data. And then a collection of environmental data. I guess there's the usual. Well, what games are you playing and what are you looking at and so forth. But what are the risks that are novel here that we need to really make sure we've set out beyond the ones we mentioned so far?
Yeah, I think a major risk that is something that folks in the AR space really need to start thinking about is when this technology is going to be used potentially in a ubiquitous way through the use of something like maybe AR glasses in public, and thinking about potentially capturing. Right?
Facebook is working with Ray-Ban on doing some sort of AR glasses at some point, which presumably I still have my Google glasses somewhere, and I'm embarrassed to put them on because they look so wacky. I guess a Ray-Ban specs will be a little ritzier. I have Snapchat spectacles somewhere as well around the office, but those were kind of bizarre looking, but maybe fun. So Ray-Bans might look cool. I don't know.
Yeah. The idea is that you're going to have a stylish pair of glasses that, can work as a pair of glasses. Potentially, you could have them fitted with a prescription. So a pair of glasses that you would just be wearing normally. But these glasses might capture data from, let's say, bystanders when you're using these devices in public. So that opens up a lot of questions about what rights do those bystanders have over their data? Do they have control over their data? And, can we place some safeguards in place in order not to violate bystanders' privacy or notions of privacy? So that's going to be a major area.
When Google Glass launched, one of the debates was, will it have a light on to indicate when it's recording? And their view was, no, that's like the default is you should understand that you could be recorded. And, people really debated that. Snapchat took a different tack in when you were recording and you could only record for 15 seconds and so forth. It was very clear. There was like a glowing light that, you're now in a Snapchat video. Do we know what anybody's planning on doing here with the fact that I'm wearing a camera on my head?
Yeah, so we do know sort of what some folks are planning on. For example, Magic Leap has come out to say that as part of their guidelines for application developers for their device, no application should be able to identify another person or a bystander who I might come into contact with. So that's an example of a control that's already in place. And in terms of what other companies are thinking, there's a lot of debate about things like you mentioned facial recognition. That's certainly a flashpoint, and a lot of discussion as to whether that will be included in these devices, whether or not it makes sense to have an outright ban, whether or not there are potentially some exceptions. There's a lot of conversation happening there. And also,
big data on the device, is that an option so that it doesn't get sent off?
Yeah, definitely. That's something that's tricky sort of from a technical perspective, in that, you have a device collecting so much data, but through the use of 5G, for example, and those innovations, you might be able to store more data at the edge, so close to the device, which is considered a more privacy-friendly way of doing things. But I think questions involving like data minimization, for example, might have to be re-examined in this space, because this vast amount of data is being tracked just for these devices to function.
Well, maybe one might minimize, at least by not keeping it too long, or logging what's needed, but not logging, the unique biometric. If at the end of the day, what's needed is a certain amount, for rendering or for forensics, right? I mean, once you look hard, sometimes it turns out that you may need less than necessary, and the speed and the pace might benefit. There also seem to be issues around social interaction, right? I mean, the benefit of these things is you're going to be interacting with other people. We've already seen, with like Clubhouse, how do you moderate stuff that's live, right? The companies have a hard time keeping up with the Twitters and Facebooks and the content when there is opportunity to review and examine it after. We saw Clubhouse, how do you live, jump in and know that someone is bullying or doing something inappropriate? They record it so that somebody can report it, and then they delete it, but it's very confusing. What are some of the issues here around harassment? I remember, again, visiting Magic Leap a couple of years ago. They had virtual assistants, and one of the virtual assistants, of course, was a beautiful figure, and you could see how right away creepy people would maybe want to go up and touch or harass. And what they did was that when you came too close, she disappeared. We kind of basically said, don't get in anyone else's space. Now, leaving aside that they're probably going to be porn and other, touch intensive type things, going on. But for the, gaming, which has its own problem with sexual harassment and the right, how are companies thinking about dealing with the abuse and the harassment that we know happens whenever you have a social environment?
Yeah, the example you brought up from Magic Leap is definitely one of the more prominent ones. And, you have Facebook with their upcoming social VR experience, Horizon. They record interactions that are, only kept for a certain amount of time and can be reviewed by experts and by humans to look into harassment examples or instances, and you have the ability for users to report certain instances of harassment. But yeah, I think it's really tough, and it seems like companies overall, as the social VR landscape has matured, they really are trying to make conscious design decisions when it comes to curbing harassment. And one thing that's really fascinating to me about the space, and what I think makes it different than like harassment on more kind of traditional social media, is that you have users who feel a sense of presence. Like, while they're in a virtual world, yes, this is virtual, it's digital, but if a comment is made or an action is taken, it really is happening to that person. Even though it's digital, it's actually happening to that person. So, negative effects online could be magnified in this world. So I think there needs to be a lot of ethical design decisions and discussions when building these virtual worlds, especially since everything has to be designed. When we're in a virtual world, everything is involving a design decision. And it seems like companies are really starting to, just from talking to folks who work in this area, they're really starting to respond to a lot of these concerns and just how these systems are designed.
Digital sexual assault is unfortunately not a super new issue, and obviously could be, more pronounced if the sort of harassment and issues we see, for many of us old timers, Second Life was sort of the first big immersion in a digital world where you could misbehave and you needed moderation, and you needed where people really felt a strong sense of their identity in a way that both allowed them to express very actively their desires, their identity, but also involved the challenges. Anyway, other big takeaways from the paper, and again, we'll have it posted, and you're all invited. There's details on our Facebook page for how to join and participate in any of the discussions. But any other sort of interesting high-level takeaways for maybe any of the policymakers who are watching? Do we need special laws for this audience? Does the current state and legislative efforts sort of address it? GDPR probably already captures a lot of this sort of stuff, but what else is sort of going on that anybody ought to be aware of from the complexity of policy and legal?
Definitely, yeah. As you noted, a number of laws on the books certainly capture some of the issues we're talking about. So, GDPR, CCPA in California when looking at these comprehensive laws, and certainly biometric laws in the states. But an area that isn't really addressed in the law, and this is really Britton Heller is the leader in this line of thinking, is all of the inferences you can derive about a person based on the collection of this biometric data. And she has a term for this, biometric psychography. You're collecting a person's biometric responses to particular content. So you're collecting all of this data, and that can be used for a number of purposes, building a user profile, for example, for behavioral advertising or something else. So it's these inferences that are drawn. This is something that isn't really contemplated by the law in the books today, and could be an area that, as we look at federal privacy legislation or, updating any of these existing laws, updating these laws with XR in mind and those types of concerns, I think would really be welcomed by, consumers, by policymakers, regulators.
The new, well, not yet even new, the leaked AI draft for European AI regulation talks about AI being used for manipulation to your detriment. And I guess the concern is that, knowing those sorts of emotional type issues. Look, some of this happens in gaming already, right? We know that there are some games that monitor so closely your clicks and your browsing and become harder, become easier to try to keep you engaged or make the game more exciting or more addictive, whatever the issue is. And that's, you can see it happening here, perhaps in a much more intense way that would be certainly concerning. All right, last point that we raise, this still assumes a lot of clicking with mouses or pointing at points on the air. You've also been working on brain-machine, body-machine interaction.
Right.
And you already see that the holy grail for some of these tools is that the way you move isn't going to be a keyboard and isn't going to be, a clicker in a random box that only you can see, but rather is going to know what you think, is going to take commands from your brain. Facebook demoed a thing you can put on your wrist, and then I really can. It listens to the brain, the nerve information, and has shown that you can move a cursor and take actions and so forth. So, on one hand, for people with disabilities, phenomenal advances. Brain-machine interactions today, obviously people who are limited in being able to use the traditional UIs obviously could and will benefit from this, but it also means that some of these devices, and we've seen people being able to type and do some basic browser controls already by wearing a bit of an app. There are apps in the App Store that with a bit of a headband and some very light electrodes let you control things with your mind. But there's already been research showing that, well, we can already guess your password when you're typing it in because of that. So reading your mind, again, super exciting. You'll control the internet with your brain, but the internet might be listening and controlling you because of, so your thoughts in that direction?
Yeah, definitely. That's a super fascinating area. Yeah, and it's when you have those devices, they can both read or stimulate your brain. So you have the case of Facebook's EMG wristband, for example. It is able to gain an understanding of your intent. In which case, you're no longer, with something like typing, you're no longer limited by the dexterity of your hand. Now you can have, you can actually collect my intent to type a particular word or phrase. And this is super future looking. We're not quite there yet on a super advanced level, but that's really exciting. Also stimulation. These devices originally come from the health world that stimulate the brain in various ways to make you feel a certain way or not feel a certain way. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And I think that in terms of brain-computer interfaces and other neurotechnology, this could be yet another sensor that's augmenting these devices like a VR headset, for example. So now you are also collecting motor neurons or information about the relationship between neurons in the brain and, combining it with other data, other inferences. So it's a super fascinating space.
We don't have time to get into the way the military is probably thinking about these things. You can imagine the fighter pilot, you can imagine the training on the battlefield and so forth. And there's already been controversy over whether companies should, allow their technologies to be used, or what's the right morals and ethics around the lethal uses of that. We're out of time. Please look for the paper. Jeremy, awesome work here. Do you have one of these headsets yet? You need one, obviously. And if not, you ought to get. Have you been using one of the? What do you use? The Oculus?
Yeah. I've been really enjoying the Quest 2. My recent game of choice is actually, it's a ping pong game called 11, and the physics are phenomenal. It's like I'm playing ping pong in my living room, which is great, especially during these times. So very fun.
Thanks for joining me, Nancy Jackson. Thanks for the setup. Thanks to those of you in the comments, and we'll look forward to discussing these issues further, because super, super important, super scary, super interesting, super innovative stuff that we in some ways need in society, will benefit from, but clearly need serious parameters. We don't want the mistakes we've made of the past, where we're kind of all wondering what sort of tracking is happening online. Is it happening in the right rules when these sorts of technologies are part of society? So I think we all have an opportunity, those of us who are interested in these issues, to try to set the field now. Location, when location started becoming available, precise location with your mobile phone, we all said, oh, we get that that's sensitive. That's just not going to be used, for every targeting and tracking thing. That is precise location about where you are now. And then a couple of years later, here we are. And indeed, our sensitive location is indeed being used widely. So I think we need to learn from some of the lessons of the past and, move quickly to have the parameters in place, instead of saying, let the technology develop. And then, we don't want to stifle it with too many laws, with too much restriction. No, this is a place where we might want to make sure the lines are clear, so that technology can develop within the corridors that are actually socially safe and appropriately penned in. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.